life right, cause it can't miss. All about the game, that's a cold switch. Serving up the truth, call it ruthless. Tune in and get your fix from Blake and Vish Sports.
This is a guy you and I have been talking about since before this YouTube and all of this was a thing. We were talking about Kyle Shanahan. I loved Kyle Shanahan in 2017. I still love Kyle Shanahan, but you were not as much high on Kyle Shanahan. Sometimes it was to troll me, sometimes it was serious. So what are your thoughts of how this 49ers season has played out? And do you think Kyle Shanahan's a good head coach?
Yeah, I think this is just from being around you and a lot of Niners people. I think we just overhyped this team a lot. And we gave them expectations that maybe some were fair and some were unfair. The fact that we thought they were a bona fide playoff team, I think that was a little bit unfair. The fact that we maybe didn't take into account some of the injuries and all of that that's happened. Although we did say we were kind of right on the secondary and saying they needed to bolster it. But some of those things, like if you would have told us that Dre Kirkpatrick and Josh Norman would be the starting corners come this time, we would have probably changed our thoughts on the situation, on this team's record a lot. I think that's the fact. And you take into account the poor drafting too, thus far with how much they've played. I think we overrated this team a little bit going into the season. I think that's kind of cooked into his perception. But my thing with Kyle Shanahan that I think is the overarching issue is just too much power and over personnel and coaching. And there's very few people that can actually do both well. Even Bill Belichick, anointed, many people think the greatest NFL coach ever. He's been many Super Bowls, all that success in places besides the Patriots. He's drafting record is not that good. In the second round, he takes corners or defensive backs that are projected to be 6-rounders and are not good. His receivers that he's drafted aren't good. I mean, they acquire tight ends and receivers other ways, but his drafting is still not good. And so that's the best of the best. And Shanahan is just not at that level even. So I guess the long point I'm making here is one person should only be allowed so much power in the organization. I think that's where the issues stem from. I still think Kyle Shanahan's a good play caller. I mean, we've seen he gets into like rhythms, like the Colts game, that first drive where they were just killing them with counter runs. And they were just making Darius Leonard look not intelligent. Like he didn't know what he was doing. And then for whatever reason, they went away from that. And I just think at the end of the day, he should just focus on the coaching aspect and not personnel decisions. And I think that's the final solution to how they kind of figure this out is he going to be a good head coach? Well, if you just only have him focus on head coaching, only coaching, have someone else do the personnel stuff, he can have input here and there like any coach should. But if he just remains as the coach, I think he will be a good head coach. I do. And if he leaves the 49ers and say goes to the Falcons or goes to some other team that hires him with less power and he kind of has, only one main thing to focus on, I think he will be a good head coach. I mean, we've seen his play calling been effective wherever he goes to. So I don't think that's the issue. Is he a good head coach? I would say at this point, we can't say if he's a good head coach or not because he just hasn't been in a position where he's only coaching is kind of my main takeaway. So I don't know if he's a good coach or not. I know he's not the best with personnel decisions in my mind and drafting and trading picks to get his guy. But I think as a coach and as a play caller, he is good. So that's kind of, I know I was pretty long-winded, but that's my overall thoughts is give him only head coaching duties, and I think he will be successful. Give him too much on his plate, and no, he's not going to be as effective as he could be.
I think you nailed it. I have the same exact feelings. I think he's a terrible personnel guy. I mean, I think some of the decisions the 49ers have made in terms of value, in terms of misevaluation and all that, like everybody misses on draft picks, right? Like even the best GMs, Ron Wolf even used to miss on draft picks and players. What you can't miss on is trading 2 picks to go get Dante Pettis because you think Dante Pettis in the second round is going to be, the greatest receiver, or not the greatest receiver ever, but you think he's so good that you have to trade up 15 picks to go get him. Like those type of decisions to me are the ones that are a little bit bizarre. The Joe Williams pick. I mean, I don't want to rehash it. I rehash it with Grant every Monday. I don't want to rehash it here, but the point is the personnel things with Kyle Shanahan are bizarre and they're not great. In regards to is he a good coach? I think he is a good coach. Like I think he's a great offensive coach. I still think he has a really good scheme. I still think he's a good play caller. I think all of those things still apply. I agree. I understand where you're coming from in terms of we can't evaluate him yet because it feels like he has too much on his plate, and it looks like Kyle Shanahan, the personnel guy, has really failed Kyle Shanahan, the coach. But I also don't know if we can call him a good coach at this point. I mean,
Mhm.
Bill Parcells coined the phrase "You are what your record says." And technically, he's not what his record says because there's nuance and there's details that we have to cover and context in terms of their record, right? 2017 roster, like they were rebuilding. That roster was terrible. 2018, Garoppolo went down. Then 2019, they went to the Super Bowl. 2020, it was all hurt. And now 2021, they're not playing good football. But I also don't think you can call him a good head coach at this point because there's issues I have, I think, in terms of game management and situational management that I think fall on him as a head coach. And I think those type of decisions cause him to lose more games. I think his X's and O's acumen and his scheme genius makes him compete with a lot of teams, even if his team is inferior in terms of talent or whatever. Though I think this team does have talent. I think they're just underperforming across the board, and that starts with him. Um, though you and I were actually overrating them when we said they were the seventh or sixth seed in the playoffs. Just wanted to
That's not
include
safe.
that because I know a lot of people here were quite upset when we said they were. You said seventh, I said sixth, so we had them kind of in the same tier, going either 9-8 or 10-7. That was kind of where we had them. But again, not to go on that tangent. What I wanted to say was, he makes too many errors to me in terms of game management and situational management, and they're not a good situational football team, and that starts with him. And so I think because of that, it's really difficult to call him a good head coach at this point. I think he's a really good offensive coach. I think with a strong GM and given that he can, learn from his mistakes in San Francisco, I 100% believe he would be successful in his second stop. Sadly, I'm not saying he should be fired this year or anything, but I just don't see him reaching the pinnacle of his career with the 49ers. I just feel like for whatever reason that's coming in his second stop, and it hurts me to say that because I'm a Niners fan, but I'm sick to my stomach just with the way my brain is thinking about these things. But yeah, overall, I'm 100% with you. Good offensive play caller, terrible personnel guy.
And then one more thing too, and this isn't to be like saying he's bad, but maybe he's just not fit to be a head coach. And this has happened with many other guys. Vic Fangio comes to mind. Everywhere he's been in DC, yes, they've had some talented teams on the Niners and the Bears. Like those defenses had a lot of talent. But he was a great DC. Wade Phillips, similarly, not the best head coach, great DC. And maybe he is kind of that mold where if you just have him focus strictly on play calling, he will be incredible. He will be an absolute genius. But when you give him the head coaching duties and you have to, give him personnel stuff too, maybe that's where it just flips and he's just not able to handle all those things. And that's not a dig on him in any sense. It's not easy being an NFL head coach, a successful one at that. It's really hard to do. So maybe that is the solution for him, is just being one of those guys that's an OC and mainly just focuses on the play calling and just dialing up his run packages that are very, very successful.
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from, and I think it is a fair thought. I'm not ready to go there because I think he deserves one more head coaching shot. If he flops in his next head coaching stop too, I think that's more or less what his perception would be, and I think it would be correct. But I do think no matter what happens over the next 2-3 years with the 49ers, even if it all ends miserably, I think he deserves one more shot given that he's still 42 years old and we know what kind of potential he has, especially given how good he is as a game plan designer and a play caller. But I mean, there's just things to me before he becomes a good head coach that need to improve. And they're not just personnel decisions, it's just situational decisions. It's really situational stuff that bothers me in terms of game management. And then the other thing is sometimes I feel like he can be a little bit tone deaf. And a lot of I don't like talking about the personal side of things just because you don't know how one person feels about a decision. You can only speculate, and it's really tough to speculate. But a lot of people have been talking about, how tone deaf it is to basically tear down Jimmy Garoppolo, or be not he didn't personally do it, but he allowed it because of who he flirted with. Basically have Jimmy Garoppolo be torn down by the media for 2 straight years, flirt with every quarterback, and then expect him to come in and help you win games this year and all of that and not move on from it. It's just everything just feels like sometimes a little bit bizarre. That's really the word I can use. Or, the Ayuk situation being discussed in the media, I thought was a little bit extra. I don't think the media needed to know that he wasn't working hard enough with the GPS. It wasn't just him, it was John Lynch too. But those things just don't need to be out in the media, in my personal opinion. It's unfair to Brandon Ayuk for people like you and I to be questioning his work ethic in his profession. I certainly wouldn't like that, even if there was a GPS tracking my screen time. So I just think stuff like that can be a little bit maybe, missing on the personal aspect of it. Maybe we're nitpicking, maybe we're speculating too far. I don't know. But at this point, I don't think we can definitively call him a good head coach. We know he's a good offensive play caller. We know he's a great offensive game designer. We know he's a bad personnel guy. I think more or less I land where you are at, where it's difficult to call him bad either, just because we would like to see him just as the head coach without having personnel power. But I don't think we can call him good either.
Definitely. And I mean, with the GPS thing, just even off that too, you mentioned the tone deaf press, like just the press conferences. After the Packers game, Matt LaFleur came out and said, I need to do a better job of setting my guys up for success. How many times have we heard Shanahan say something like that? It is
Yeah.
not very frequent. All about execution. And yeah, like maybe it is about execution, but constantly throwing other people under the bus is maybe not the best way to go about things, and shouldering some of the blame yourself. And it's not easy to do. And I'm not saying that, like I would be someone who's like, oh yeah, I'm not doing good enough. I'm failing these guys. It's hard to do that. But when you see some of the other successful guys doing that successfully and, saying, oh, I got to do better this, I got to do better that, and always trying to improve and maybe shouldering some of the blame yourself. And that's something I know a lot of people have been a little frustrated with.
Yeah. And to be fair to him, right, we don't know if he takes accountability. Maybe he comes out in the building and he just takes full accountability. He just doesn't do it with the
Yeah.
media. We don't know that. But the point is, I just feel like it looks a lot better if he's less testy in the post game and he just is quite simple. He doesn't try too hard to answer these questions or give an honest question. He just says the way Belichick said or the way LaFleur said. Jordan Love had a lot of issues in that game. But the first thing LaFleur said is, I got to do a better job prepping us for that zero blitz. And
Yeah.
if he just says that, look, he doesn't even have to believe it. I just feel like it goes a long way in terms of taking pressure off of us now analyzing his post game pressers because he looks like a guy without answers or he looks like a guy without a great pulse on his team. Like those type things shouldn't happen. And I feel like he gives us an opportunity to do that because he just doesn't come out and say, you know what? We didn't play well. It starts with me. I didn't coach well enough. I didn't prep us well enough, but we're going to do better next game and I'm going to coach better next game. And it's just say something simply like that. It's a little cliche, but it gets the job done.
I think it's better than saying something that's not cliche, especially for the media that tries to take every tidbit. I mean, even we're talking about it now. Just don't give anyone people or things to talk about. I mean, even if it's true, I think cliche answers work really well in those interviews, and even post game interviews with players. It's always cliche stuff, and you wonder why. You just don't want to give the media something to run away with. But that might be a little too much, but I think there's some truth in that.
I agree.